We use it every single second of every single day. But have you ever really stopped to think about it? I'm talking about electricity. Today, we're going to trace its incredible, invisible journey from a power plant that could be hundreds of miles away, right to the switch on your wall.
You know, it really does feel like magic, doesn't it? You flick a switch and boom, a room just fills with light, instantly. But behind that one simple action is one of the most amazing engineering feats of the modern world, the electrical grid. So let's follow that journey from the moment electricity is born all the way to your home.
All right, so every journey has a starting point. Ours begins at the source, the power station. But to really get what these giant plants are doing, we first need to understand the thing they're making. In other words, what is electricity anyway?
On the most basic, fundamental level, it's just this. It's a flow. Seriously, think of it like water that always wants to move from a high place to a low place. In a wire, you have these tiny particles called electrons, and they're just drifting along, creating a current. That's it. That simple drift is the phenomenon that powers our entire world.
Now, this electron flow comes in two main flavors. You've got direct current, or DC, which is a nice, steady one-way street. Think of the power coming out of a battery. But the real hero of our story today is alternating current, or AC. This is where the flow zips back and forth, constantly reversing. AC won the big war of the currents way back when, for one huge reason. Its voltage can be changed really easily. And that, as we're about to see, is the absolute secret to sending power over massive distances.
Okay, so our AC power has been created. Now for the really hard part. How do you get it from that power station, which might be out in the middle of nowhere, to all the cities and towns that need it? Well, this is where we begin the high-stakes journey across the grid.
The whole trip happens in these 5 key stages. First, it's generated. Then, the voltage is stepped way up for the long haul. It's transmitted across the country. Then the voltage is stepped back down at a local substation. And finally, it's distributed to our neighborhoods. But wait a minute. Step up? Why on earth would we make the power more powerful, more dangerous, just to send it on a trip?
It just seems totally backward, right? You make the power, and then the first thing you do is use a giant transformer to crank the voltage way, way up before you send it out. What is the logic there?
Well, the answer comes down to one word: efficiency. See, when electricity moves through a wire, it's kind of like a runner in a marathon. It loses energy along the way. For electricity, that lost energy escapes as heat. The whole grid is basically designed to fight that energy loss and be as efficient as possible.
And here it is. This is the secret sauce for the entire grid. The amount of energy you lose as heat is almost totally dependent on the current, how much electricity is flowing. So if you can lower the current, you slash the energy loss. The way you do that while sending the same amount of power is a simple trade-off. You crank up the voltage to insane levels, which lets you drop the current way down. This is exactly why AC is king. You can easily step its voltage up and down.
And when I say they crank it up, I mean it. A power station might generate electricity at something like 11,000 volts, but for that long-distance trip, it gets stepped up to as high as 330,000 volts, sometimes even more. That's why you see those massive transmission towers marching across the countryside. They're carrying incredibly high-voltage power with maximum efficiency.
All right, our electricity has made it across the country. It's arrived at the edge of your town. Now we get to the final act, taking that power from the local grid and getting it safely into your house. This is the final mile.
So, this last leg of the journey has a few steps. First, a local substation takes that super high voltage power and steps it down to a much safer level for your neighborhood. From there, a service cable, either overhead or underground, brings it to your house. It connects to your meter box. That's what the utility company uses to see how much you've used. And then it goes into the consumer unit, what most of us call the breaker box. That's the nerve center for your home's entire electrical system.
And inside that breaker box, that main power line gets split up into several different circuits. And each one is protected by its own switch, or breaker. This gives you dedicated paths for your lights, another for your outlets, and even separate, beefier circuits for big appliances like an electric stove or a water heater.
Okay, so we've followed the physical journey. Now to really understand the forces at work here, we need to learn the language. There are 3 key concepts that explain how all of this works.
First up, you've got voltage. The absolute best way to think about this is like water pressure. Voltage is the electrical push. It's the force that makes those electrons want to move in the first place. If you don't have voltage, you don't have any flow.
Next, we have current, which we measure in amps. So if voltage is the pressure in the pipe, current is the actual amount of water flowing through it. It's how many electrons are zipping past a single point every second.
And finally, there's resistance. Let's stick with our water pipe. Resistance is like a narrow spot in that pipe that creates friction and makes it harder for the water to get through. A big, thick copper wire has really low resistance, but the tiny filament inside an old light bulb has super high resistance. That's what makes it heat up and glow.
And the most beautiful thing about all this is that these three ideas, voltage, current, and resistance, they're all perfectly connected by one simple, elegant rule, Ohm's law. It just says that voltage equals current times resistance. That's it. With that one little formula, you can figure out any of them if you know the other two. It is the fundamental rulebook for pretty much all electric circuits.
So, what about when you see a 60-watt light bulb? Well, that number is talking about power, measured in watts. Power tells you the rate at which energy is being used, and you calculate it just by multiplying voltage times current. It's how much energy an appliance is gobbling up every second it's running.
We've covered the physics, the massive engineering, the whole trip from start to finish. But how does this all translate into something we definitely all understand, the monthly electric bill?
Okay, this is the final and most important distinction. The power company doesn't actually bill you for how fast you used energy. That's power in watts. Nope, they bill you for the total amount of energy you used over the entire month. And that total amount is measured in a unit you've probably seen before, the kilowatt hour. It sounds complicated, but it's exactly what it says it is. It's the energy you use when you run something that needs 1,000 watts of power for one continuous hour. So, if you leave 10 100-watt light bulbs on for an hour, you've just used 1 kilowatt hour of energy.
And that is the final step. The meter on the side of your house counts up all those kilowatt hours you use. Then, the utility company just multiplies that number by whatever their rate is, and boom, that's your bill. That whole mind-boggling journey from a spinning turbine hundreds of miles away all comes down to that one simple calculation.
So there you have it. From a tiny electron drifting in a wire to a massive grid spanning a continent all the way to the bill in your mailbox. That's the journey of electricity. It's a centralized, incredibly efficient, but also aging system. Which leaves us with a big question. With things like solar panels popping up on our roofs and batteries in our garages, what will this incredible journey look like tomorrow? Thanks for tuning in.